there isn't one definition of fairness, right? If you look at philosophy, whether it's like moral or political philosophy, or you look at the law, or even you look at like the vibrant community in the computer science community and machine learning, right, who's thinking about algorithmic bias, one common pattern is that you have multiple definitions of fairness that are mutually incompatible. So you have to pick one.
You're listening to Gradient Descent, a show where we learn about making machine learning models work in the real world. I'm your host, Lucas Bewald. Joaquin Candela is the tech lead for responsible AI at Facebook. Prior to that, he built the applied machine learning team, which powers all production applications of AI across all of Facebook's products. Before that, Joaquin taught at University of Cambridge and worked at Microsoft Research. Today, I'm going to talk to him about fairness and algorithmic bias, scaling and democratizing AI at Facebook. You were running the applied machine learning team at Facebook, right? During a time when there was tons of machine learning innovation going on. I'd love to hear what was happening when you started working on that and kind of what tooling was necessary and how that kind of changed over the time that you were working on that.
I think the context is very important here. So I joined Facebook in mid 2012. There wasn't a lot of ML people in the company. And if you think about the two biggest applications, it was newsfeed ranking on the one hand, and then ads ranking, right? So two ranking problems. So as far as the models, were concerned, you mostly had binary classifiers that were used as inputs into a ranking function, right? So, if you think about newsfeed ranking, you would have, so my value function is some combination of, I give every click a certain score, I give every comment a score, I give every, share a score, etc., right? And then with that, I build myself like a value function. And so I have all these binary classifiers, right, that predict the probability that someone will, click, share, or comment or whatever before I show them something, right? And then I kind of use that to sort of like rank content. And for ads, it's a similar thing, right? In ads, back in the prehistorical times, click-based advertising was like the big thing, right? Maybe like, I don't even remember now, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whenever. And then, then you had conversions, right? And then there's like more subtle things where you have like brand, and then not all conversions are created equal. And then the other thing that happens, of course, is that the complexity of the content evolves, right? Like if you think about when I joined Facebook, a lot of the content was mostly text, right? Images, of course, there, fewer videos, and now that sort of becomes more complex and you have more multimodality. So I joined Facebook at a time where the company was just IPOing, and the revenue was flat, and so there was a huge pressure to try and move the needle in ads. I joined the ads team, and one of the big levers to move revenue was like, can we get better at predicting, clicks and conversions on ads, right? At the same time, you start to have, we start to move away from only serving ads on web on the right hand column to actually also serving ads, on mobile. And then actually, end of 2012 when I joined, if you look at like where people were accessing Facebook from, like web was kind of slowly declining or being stable, and then mobile was like rocketing. And I think they crossed sort of at around the end of 2012, right? So you're like the types of surfaces you have, the types of things you're predicting starts to increase. And so, the first dilemma that I had was like, I looked at what were we doing, right? And we were using the Soyuz in a way, like to go to the space station. Nothing fancy, just like the good old Soyuz, right? We were using gradient boosted decision trees as feature transformers. Mostly, you could think about it that way. And then we were using online logistic regression, sort of after that, like cascaded with it, right?
So what would you, sorry to interrupt, but what then would you train the intermediate gradient boosted tree on? What would be the kind of thing that would try to predict?
You'd still train them on the event, on the binary event that you're trying to predict, right? Like clicks or conversions or whatever. But obviously, you'd benefit from the robustness that gives you, right? Like you don't have to worry too much about like scaling and translation and whatever of your
But
of
then
your features.
you would feed them into a simpler model. So how would
Yeah,
that work?
what you would then use is the trees themselves. Every tree as a categorical feature, as it were,
Mhm.
and so then your logistic regression model, which we would be training online, has a bunch of inputs that are categorical, which are like the outputs of each of the trees, right? So it's basically like relearning, kind of relearning the weights associated to each leaf. And
Oh,
then,
interesting. Wow.
yeah,
I had not heard of that. So the thing that's changing then is the sort of the combination of the two. You train a gradient
yeah,
boosted tree, then you pull the trees apart, and then you relearn the weights of each tree in the
yeah,
combination.
yeah. It's a hack, right? Like it's not a fully backpropagated model, right? Because
Sure,
because
sure.
because you train your trees every few weeks, like
Uh-huh.
whenever, um, and then you have logistic regression that takes as inputs both, like the binary indicators, right? Like every one of the trees you train like hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand, trees.
Hmm.
So you have like, and each of the trees has like a dozen leaves or like whatever.
Uh-huh.
And you treat those as like 1 out of 12 kind of like encoding, but then you're learning a weight for each of those, and you're kind of like learning that sort of like in real time. And then you have other features that that go in side by side that can actually be sort of continuous features as well.
Cool.
So that's a setup. That's what I found when I got there. And so
Hmm.
the key decision, since you wanted to talk about like building applied ML and all that,
Hmm.
was the dilemma was the following. It was like, okay, well, this thing is begging, for a proper neural net, right? To be thrown at it, right? Like
Uh-huh.
like it's almost like we've handcrafted a Frankenstein, type of neural net by having, but like these trees, with logistic regression concatenated to it. But like we're not even like training it together, right? Like we first train the trees, and we kind of chop the output, and then we kind of plug this other thing to it, and then that's the thing that we train.
Hmm.
So it was very obvious that doing that, would probably give us gains. This was
And this is
2012.
actually so
Go ahead.
2012. It was obvious that a neural net would give you an improvement. I'm trying to remember.
Sort of.
Was that obvious to everyone?
No, no, because if you think about I think it was Rus Salakudinov and Jeff Hinton, and I might be forgetting some co-authors, so I deeply apologize because I've had a long day already. Apologies, but this was like the big ImageNet paper,
Right.
was with ConvNets, was I think from 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm. That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it was clear. I think this was like the beginning of the hockey stick.
Mm.
But I think it wasn't clear. If that had been like 2 years later, then it would have been obvious, right? But
Right. Right.
at the time, it wasn't clear yet, and you always need a couple of months, to realize that something happened.
Hmm.
So yeah, the thing that really struck me was that the time it took from doing an experiment, which a lot of it was really like feature engineering. Maybe there were some experiments with tuning, your learning ratios, and tuning like the architecture of your trees and the architecture of your, I mean, logistic regression. Although there isn't a lot of architecture to be tuned with your logistic regression, like the time to go from someone has an idea and starts to do some offline experiments to you
Hmm.
actually have your new click prediction or conversion prediction model for mobile or whatever in production, right? And actually like materializing those gains would be several weeks.
Hmm.
It'd be like sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 2 months.
Hmm.
And I thought, holy crap, that's not great, right? And so the crossroads, in a way, on the one hand, you're like, okay, this thing I have is simple, but we're still getting a lot of gains by tuning it, right?
Hmm.
And on the other hand, I can go and just like replace my Soyuz with something like sophisticated, right? So that was like the crossroads that I. So do you want to know what I decided to do?
Tell me. Yes. I feel like you're kind of picking on the Soyuz. I don't. I didn't know that
oh,
was the metaphor for a
so
rudimentary thing.
uh, it's true that the Soyuz. Well, I mean, I think the Soyuz is rudimentary in the sense that like the computer systems that the Soyuz has in it
Mm, I see.
are probably 50 years old, or like I don't, something like that, right? But
Right.
they
Right.
they work, right? So the reason I use a Soyuz analogy is more like it gets the job done. It's like
I see.
a gradient boosted decision tree and logistic regression, right? It's like, just as an aside, one thing that triggers me these days a little bit is I see people, jump straight. If they have to solve an NLP task, they'll use either some sort of a sequence model, they're using LSTM, they'll
Hmm.
use what I mean, I guess these days a transformer or like whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like, and sometimes you go like, did you try like a max ant model? Did you try like a good old bag of words with logistic regression?
Hmm.
And the surprising thing is that I would say between 20 and 50% of the time, you get the same results.
Right.
And
Right.
and then you're like, did you realize how much cheaper this thing is, right? In terms of anything you care about, right? Whether it's like training time, inference time, whatever, right? So yeah, so basically the big bet there was to say, well, what we need to do here is we need to actually allow our teams to ship every week. And there
Mm-hmm.
was like the big motto was like ship every week,
Mm-hmm.
do whatever it takes so that every week we can ship new models to production. And what that meant was like, oh, we need to dramatically accelerate that path from I have a new model that I could put in production to like it's in production.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of like triggered 5 years of work.
And so, what were the keys? I mean, tell me the pieces that you needed to build in order to allow that to happen. Because I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are thinking, "I'd like to ship a model every week." What do you need in order to do that safely?
It was many things at different levels. So at a very low level, it's about fitting in, seamlessly in like whatever infrastructure you have for inference, right? And adopting some sort of like standards, which seems super easy and trivial, but even that you shouldn't take for granted. The part that I thought was even more interesting is that I think what was slowing people down was probably two or three things. One was it was extremely difficult to share work between people because people would be running experiments in their own dev servers, and even like having, like as we all know, like configs aren't, or back then weren't sort of easily portable. Like it would just take you, I don't know, like a couple of hours or like, whatever. You'd have like an energy barrier before I could actually play with what you had done, right? The second thing, which I think is related, is that you started to have a lot of teams reinventing the wheel. So a lot of the work that was being done was actually duplicate. Because as the number of surfaces on which we showed, ads sort of kept increasing and the types of modalities kept increasing, you kind of had like teams that focused on like one of those voxels in your tensor of configurations, and they wouldn't sort of easily talk to each other, or like the work wouldn't be discoverable, right? So thing number one was like automate everything. You have to automate everything. You have to make it ridiculously easy, and you have to abstract, everything from the engineering trying to deploy something, right? Especially because we're growing very fast, and you get a lot of people who are joining the company fresh from somewhere. Maybe they are good applied researchers, but they're not infra people necessarily. So abstracting and automating, super important. The
Mm-hmm.
second, shareability, right? Like make
Mm-hmm.
sure that you abstract and encapsulate things in a way where they're like super easy to share. So I can see what input features are working for you. If you're working on like conversion prediction models for in-game ads or like whatever, I can super easily see that. Obviously, you have infra work again, right? Like because the way we store and represent data is very heterogeneous. So there's like it's a pain in the butt usually to, even if you're only looking at like reproducing training, depending on like what your setup is, that's like work. But then going, obviously the way you run your data pipelines when you're training offline versus when you're trying to serve in real time, is different almost always.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when you're online, you're on a budget, so you want to make as few calls as possible when you're serving. So you gotta sort of figure out how to abstract those things and again like hide all complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one, which I think is really, really interesting, is really like think about collaboration by design, right? Like how can you build an environment where I go in and I can see every single experiment anyone has run. And I can go and by clicking, I can see, first of all, who they are. Who they are is huge, right? Because then I know who to ask, especially if I'm new to the company and you have a company that's growing fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the equivalent of your Git blame or whatever is super important. Like you need to know who people are.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, again, is like so much is wasted in terms of replicating experiments that someone has already done. So like bookkeeping, is extremely important. And then the ability to just like beg, borrow, and steal, bits of pieces, either of like feature computations or like models. We were like exposing learning curves and things like that as well, so you can actually sort of browse them. And then another component, and I'm not being super organized here. I think I've said it's three things, and I'm at like the fifth thing already. But like another one is like try to be as modular, as possible, right? And if possible as well, like language agnostic, and separate out like the language or the platform that you're using to kind of specify whatever models you're building from the definition of a workflow and the execution of a workflow. So really, really abstracting that away, right? And sort of thinking about, okay, an ML workflow is an ML workflow. And I don't care, if you're specifying your models in MATLAB, Octave, Python, PyTorch, TensorFlow, like whatever it is that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the bread and butter that you're doing is kind of common, right? So really layer it, modularize it, was sort of huge.
It's interesting. I feel like the things that you're saying are the things that all ML leaders want that I talk to. But I think the place that they get tripped up, I mean, all the benefits that you're saying totally make sense. But I think the sort of downside is that it requires getting everyone's buy-in into kind of a standard way of
Yeah,
doing things. And I'm curious how you got that, because
yeah,
ML practitioners are so hard to hire and they're often
yeah.
opinionated and working in different parts of the org. How did you get them all to buy into the same
Often opinionated.
system?
Opinionated. You say. I would like to meet one that is not opinionated. Sometimes not opinionated. Yeah, it's tricky, right? And this is actually, so you're putting the finger on an amazing point, which is really almost like change management, right? Very, very hard. Several reasons why it's hard. Reason number one, in any fast moving company where you have low hanging fruit, I mean, this is not unique to ML, right? Who's going to actually pause and do and clean up the kitchen, right? And like pay back some tech debt, or like build infra so you move faster. It's like you're almost like, hey, why don't you do it? Like
Right.
I don't feel like doing it myself, right? So that's like one challenge. The other one, of course, is a sense of pride that people have, right? I mean, and especially, I used to be in academia, and in academia, the thing that determines your worth is almost like the praise you get for the work that you do, but you put your name on your papers, right? So
Right.
culturally, it's tricky, right, to sort of say, and I'm going to surrender some of that, right, for the greater good. So the the tactic that we took, one of them was just to be ridiculously laser focused. So look, the one thing that I should have clarified is I never dreamt that one day I would build the applied machine learning team at Facebook. That was not the intent. Like I was in ads, we're focused in ads. But even within ads, we already started to have several teams working on several aspects of the problem. So at least we worked on generating alignment and a vision within ads. And that was not like a million people, that was just like a couple of dozen people, right? And we were, I think, all feeling the pain and the urgency to move fast. So it was semi-obvious that this was going to be good. It was a bold bet. So you need to kind of generate alignment both, on the people who are deploying things and doing experiments every day, but also obviously get management, to give you air cover, because things are going to slow down, right? Like I remember talking to my manager at Fields Coffee end of 2012, where like revenue was still, not picking up. And he was asking me, hey, you haven't been shipping models all that often. Like what's going on? And I'm like, oh, actually, we're going to slow down even more. And it was like, explain. And then,
Right.
and then you explain, you get into the details, you get like buy-in on the vision at all levels. But you keep it very, very narrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened once we started to have progress and stuff started to move faster, and like you saw productivity increase, then we started to talk to the feed ranking team. And then the feed ranking team, we decided to like join forces probably like summer 2013. And that was really interesting because there again, you have to just be laser focused, right? Like don't don't think about the features first, don't think abstract first, don't think about like, it's not like platform first and then we see what happens. It's like be extremely concrete. Like here's the types of things I want to make work. And also just accept that one day you'll have to rewrite it, and that day came.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, you want to prove the hero scenario, right? Like you want to prove like, hey, this can actually be amazing, right? So that was the approach. It was like very, very extremely laser focused. Start very small, start adding people, build almost like a community that supports each other. Really go like, from a core and then start expanding.
It's interesting, at Weights and Biases, we make a tool, and I actually hadn't really realized how similar our tool's vision is to what you were building. Like our hope is to really help with collaboration and reproducibility.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the same idea of like, we really want people to be able to find the person that made the thing and not have to, redo all the work from scratch. And I think we have maybe even more trouble than you getting buy-in, right? Because, no one knows us anything, right? Like,
Right.
why would
Right.
someone want to, use our tool? And I feel like for us, a big part of it is like showing little wins to the individual practitioner. Like I feel like there's little details in our product that we try to, just like give like a, something helpful right out of the gate to, someone new coming in before they do the collaboration and before they have to really buy into our system. I wonder if there was any things like that for you where people are like, "Ooh, I want that." Like I want to be able to see the system metrics of my runs or something like that got people to use your stuff.
Yeah, no, excellent question.
I'm just mining you selfishly for features for a product, really.
That was so shameless. Yeah,
I know.
so obvious. So one big caveat, Lucas, that I have to say, of course, is that when I was very involved with this stuff in the early days, that was like already like 7 and 6 years ago. So I know that things have changed a lot. Like,
Of
and
course.
I know that you have like open source tools today, which if we had them, we would have just used them directly, including maybe weights and biases products, right? So your question is, if you set aside like the collaboration benefits and all that, like just in terms of pure individual contributor, productivity, why would I care?
Mhm.
I have both news and I have bad news, I guess. Good news and bad news. I think the bad news maybe is that some of the problems we solved were actually a bit Facebook specific. So
Mhm.
I think that that's not going to be useful to you. But like in terms of like abstraction, right, and like just the ability to almost like at the click of a button, like the fact that you could actually clone a workflow. I'm going to give you an example. Here's an
Yeah.
example. So you're the Instagram ML team, and Instagram's never been ranked before. Like Instagram's feed has been shown like in decreasing in a chronological order, right,
Mhm.
from most recent to less recent. And you're tasked with like, hey, design me a ranking system for Instagram, right? That's kind of like a tall order. But imagine now that you have an environment where you can actually just like look at the production system that ranks newsfeed.
Mhm.
There's a lot you can borrow there, right? And so I think just like the ability to borrow, where there's like the features that seem to be working the best, the models, the sort of a training schedule, the hyperparameters, all of that is like a big thing. In parallel to that, you have like abstractions, right? Like again, like at Facebook, I don't even know how many distinct and mutually incompatible data stores we have. But you can imagine, right? So but
Uh-huh.
and the fact that the tool will actually abstract that for you is very useful as well. Then if you have to build a workflow yourself, building workflows is a pain, right? Like if you have to do them from, if you don't have a tool to build workflows, it's just a pain. And then another one, tools for debugging, and automation. So I'll give you an example of a couple of things. Tool for automation, automatic feature selection. The fact that you have a tool that actually scans for every feature you could possibly use, and then while you're sleeping, it's just making sure that you have maximum machine utilization, and you're just like doing whatever feature selection algorithm you want. I don't care, it doesn't matter. But it's just doing work for you,
Mhm.
including during the weekend. So true stories is ads engineers would come in the morning on Monday, and they would see like proposals
Mhm.
for new models, and you're like, oh, this looks good. Like I get a couple of 0.1 whatever percent points of gain in like whatever metric, and that's good. The other one is one very simple reason ML systems fail is because some data pipeline fails, right? And again, like if you have to be checking ad hoc, it's a pain. Imagine that you have like this beautiful dashboard, with colors and whatever that just tell you what features are not working and in which way are they not working anymore. Is it that you have like statistical things, like they still produce valid values, but they're like the same all the time, or is it that you get like things that are not a number? Like what the hell is going on, right? That's like super useful as well, right? Or like tools to look at your learning curves and whatever. So yeah, these are like a bunch of examples of things which, like, if you're an ML engineer, you want that stuff.
Totally. That totally makes sense. I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for the other thread of questions, which is the new work you're doing. As I think it says on LinkedIn, you're the tech lead for responsible AI,
Yeah.
which is it sounds like a tall order. I mean, there's so many possible questions here. I was kind of wondering what would be the most interesting, but I think I guess the genuine question that's top of mind for me is always, walk me through a real decision, like where it wasn't obvious what to do, and by some kind of analysis or thinking about it, bring your expertise, you were able to kind of guide Facebook to a better decision. Does something come to mind?
I'm going to start from the India elections. This was the biggest election in human history with almost a billion eligible voters. So what's the challenge, and why, and where does AI come in? Well, the challenge is that, there's a lot of concerns of election interference through the spread of information, which is either, false or misleading or voter suppression or like whatever it might be, right?
Mhm.
And of course, the way you address this, if you're Facebook or a similar company, is you create guidelines for like what things, are acceptable and what not. There's of course legal constraints as well,
Mhm.
and then you just hire a bunch of humans, like as many as you can. And
Mhm.
you would know about that because you've worked on that in the past, right? So you have like humans who are actually processing a queue of work, right? And that queue of
Mhm.
work is like just reviewing posts.
Mhm.
But when you have a country the size of India, and like the volumes of information or content that are created every day on Facebook,
Mhm.
it's just impossible. Like you cannot hire enough humans to review like even even a decent fraction of everything. So it's impossible, right?
Right.
So the way you use AI is use AI to prioritize human work, right?
Mhm.
And the way you do this is for example, you train a type of classifiers that we have used. We call them civic classifiers, and what they do is they try to tell whether the piece of content is just like a picture of a cat, which is
Mhm.
like whatever, doesn't matter, or people like me, I'm a runner. Is it like, did I post a new run on Strava? Right? It's like whatever, it doesn't matter for the elections, or whether it's like actually someone discussing something that's actually relevant, right? Social or political or civic issues, right?
Mhm.
And then at least make sure that that type of content gets coverage. Okay, so what's the challenge? We're talking about resource allocation. We're talking about like you have this set of humans that we're paying to protect the elections from interference.
Mhm.
And now the question is, okay, and we're using AI to prioritize our work.
Mhm.
Well, what happens if your NLP works only for Hindi?
Wait, sorry.
So,
Could you even back up a second? Because this is probably
yeah.
obvious to you, but it's not totally obvious to me. Like, what? Assuming you had like unlimited, human resources to do something, what is the thing you're trying to do? I mean, obviously, you're not trying to block everything that's on the
Oh,
topic of an
sorry.
election. So,
Yeah.
what's
Apologies.
the
Yeah.
goal?
I should have explained that. You will block things if they violate laws, right? So if you have like I don't know, like defamation of like public figures, with like lies, or just like illegal content, or
Mhm.
reduce the distribution of things that are harmful. So it's both like filtering and reducing distribution of things that violate our community standards or like laws. So that's the action that you're taking with a
I see.
combination of like humans and AI. And so the challenge there again is like if you look at this from like a fairness point of view, maybe your definition of fairness is that if we're investing a certain amount of human resources to do this job, that we want to make sure that everyone in India gets protection from this type of harmful content. Yeah, and then the question there becomes like, what does that mean, right? Because if you think about algorithmic fairness and bias, if you're thinking about like using AI to recommend jobs to people, then
Mhm.
you get into like, and you're in the US, you think about like protected categories. You think about gender, age, race or ethnicity and stuff like that, right? Where there's like anti-discrimination laws that exist. But if you think about this problem in India, you're like, oh, politically, what are the hot areas, right? And then immediately, when you work with local people, it's things like caste or religion. But obviously, we don't have that data, and it's not clear that we should, right, have that data. So in the end, you do a bunch of work and you figure out, well, what can I do? And so we ended up using like language and region.
Sorry. Well, again, if you had caste and ethnicity, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm showing my ignorance here, but if you
No,
had those things, what would you do with that? Like, what would be the fair thing to do that you're trying to do?
so the challenge with fairness, right, and that's where like we're going to go back all the way to music somehow, is that there isn't one definition of fairness, right? If you look at philosophy, whether it's like moral or political philosophy, or you look at the law, or even you look at like the vibrant community in the computer science community and machine learning, right, who's thinking about algorithmic bias, one common pattern is that you have multiple definitions of fairness that are mutually incompatible. So you have to pick one, right?
Hmm.
So in this case, the one that you could pick is you could say, well, I want to make sure that everyone, irrespective of their caste or religion, is going to see content that has received a comparable amount of protection against harmful or like content that is basically misleading, or imagine like there's like voter suppression type of content there, right? That spreads lies about like, I mean, there's even stuff like just lying about when the election day is, or like whatever, like
I see. Okay,
and
I
then
see that. Thanks. That's helpful. Yeah.
yeah,
So
then you kind of miss it, right? Or maybe like maybe lying about what a particular politician stands for, right? Like just sort of putting out something that's completely false or like whatever,
right,
right?
right.
So you want to, yeah, go ahead.
So I guess one way, just to repeat back what you're saying, one way would be like we want to make sure everyone like across groups like caste or religion gets the same level of protection
Correct.
by
Yeah,
by actual humans looking at the content.
that's exactly right.
Why might that not be like the most fair approach? Well, would there be a different argument for a different?
Yeah. You have situations where so here, this would be like an equal treatment type of argument where you would say, we want to treat everybody the same. And
Mhm.
equal treatment is, I think, in many cultures, like the sort of like the first instinct that you have. But you could think about other things, right? You could think on the one hand, you could dial things more towards equity, and in equity, you could look at like historical, disadvantages that some group might have had, right? Like, is there a case where like historically, some castes and religions are privileged compared to others, and like the pressure, or like the amount of misinformation, or like if you think about the US, right, like not every group in the US has historically had equal access to voting, right? And even
Mhm.
today, like voter suppression efforts are not uniformly distributed. Like some groups are actually more targeted than others, right? So you could
Mhm.
actually say, no, I'm actually going to understand, whether I should prioritize outcomes for some groups over others, right? and
Right.
and if you think about like there's many sort of public policies in society that actually sort of aim at focusing more on some groups that have been disadvantaged.
I see. And so, what did you do?
So in this case, we went for the equal treatment approach. And then what we did, this triggered a whole amount of work. We first of all, we don't have caste and religion, and there's many reasons, there's many risks, why a corporation shouldn't have, certain type of demographic information. There's like a lot of examples in history why it's just dangerous to have repositories of certain, demographic characteristics.
Sure.
So what we did is we used reasonable alternatives like language and region, right? And so we
Mhm.
said, okay, we want to make sure that all regions in India, and like not all languages, because there's like a huge amount of languages in India, but like I think we went for like the top, I don't remember anymore, top 15 plus minus, languages are sort of well protected. And then you can get into things, okay, how do I translate that into math and code, right?
Uh-huh.
And so you need to look at many levels, right? Like one, you need to look, the most basic thing is when you look at the data, you look at two things. You look at representation, and then you look at biases in the labels, right?
Uh-huh.
So representation, make sure that across, you build yourself your matrix of like, regions and languages, and make sure that for each of these buckets, you have a sufficient amount of labeled training data. And then once you're in one of these buckets, you kind of you get yourself some ground truth data, and that would be like a very long conversation to figure out what that is, but like
Yeah.
expensive high quality data that you can use as a reference, right? And then
Right.
you kind of measure, you look at the difference in errors that you have in your labeling process across all these buckets, and you want to make sure that you don't have systematic differences. But of course, that's not enough, right? Then you actually look at your models themselves, right? You train your model, and you look at things like, oh, in the prediction errors, do I have systematic differences? And one cool thing to look at if you have binary classifiers, and you're using, here you would be using the probability that something is civic content to prioritize review. In that context, it's very reasonable to use actually calibration, to look at the whole calibration curve,
Mhm.
and make sure that my calibration curve, right, which maps scores to actual outcome rates, make sure that those curves look similar, for different groups, right? That I'm not like over predicting, for one group and under predicting for another. Because if I were over predicting for a particular language, then I would be allocating more human resources to that language. And if I'm under predicting for another, I'm allocating fewer resources, but it's not justified because, that doesn't reflect, the actual volume of content that actually needs to be reviewed for both.
But is it? I guess is it possible that some language has more banned content? And then how can you be sure that it seems like your
Yeah.
model would sort of naturally use that as like a feature in the model, and then it would sort of naturally get over indexed? Like, how do you back that out?
I think that's how that's where you use calibration, right? So if you think about a calibration curve, you're looking at how your scatter plot of like you know like you group your scores, right? So the thing is predicting a score at 0 to 1, which we interpret as a probability
Right.
of something being needs review, right?
Uh-huh.
It's true that the distribution of scores is going to be different between languages, right? Like if one language is being more under attack, then you're going to see more stuff with a higher probability. But what
Hmm.
you really want is like once you bucket things by score,
Hmm.
you want to kind of look within those buckets. What's the actual percentage of content that was violating in that in that bucket? And you want to make sure that zero point 0.6 means roughly 60% for any language, right? And then the number of pieces of content that fall within that bucket is going to be different between languages, but that's not a problem, right? I mean, and eventually, as a result of the distributions being different of scores, you'll end up investing more or less resources in a language or another. But at least you have apples to apples in terms of your risk scores.
I see. So you let the model use the language, but then you back it out in sort of a like a post analysis based on the actual performance. Am I explaining
You
it right?
I mean, if you're using NLP and you're building like different classifiers for different languages, then inevitably,
Right. Right.
inevitably, you're using the language in like your NLP model. I mean, having said this, of course, we have like we have like a cross-lingual embeddings and all these fancy things, obviously, but you still need like some sort of training data. Um, that's the question of whether you should use an input signal or not, is a long and fascinating discussion as well. And I think it is, in my view, somewhat orthogonal to many of the ways in which you would make sure that you have procedural fairness in your classifier. So we need another couple of hours to discuss that, because that's actually a very active topic. One of the papers that explains this well is Cynthia Dwork's and co-workers paper called Fairness Through Awareness. Probably butchering the title, is more to it, but there's this debate, where like, oh, if you're trying to be fair across genders when you're recommending job offers, should you actually not use gender as an input to your algorithm, or should you use it? And there's examples that illustrate, both positions.
Hmm.
So I don't think it's as easy as to say, oh, if I don't use gender as an input to my algorithm, then I know I'm going to be fine. And the reason is simple, right? Is that you have a lot of features that correlate with gender anyway,
Hmm.
but then also, if you think about it from a causal perspective, you're going to have like certain things you can measure which have opposing effects, depending on whether you're a male or a female. For one, females carry babies and get gaps in their CVs. And so,
Hmm.
is the effect of a gap in your CV the same, depending on your circumstances? That's not clear, right?
Hmm.
So, causality actually is probably one of the most exciting, lenses on fairness in many ways, but it's
Hmm.
super early days.
Interesting. I guess to ask you another question is probably another long question, and this is one of the ones I always worry about with the fairness and AI stuff. Um, I guess, how do you engage with the people who are actually like affected by these decisions? Like, it always makes me a little nervous, this idea that like, scientists go in and sort of like get to decide
Yeah,
what's fair. And I can kind of see why, right? It's like, it's important that someone kind of understands the algorithms. That's one point of view. But I mean, like,
yeah.
how did you engage with the folks in India who are affected by this to even decide what's the fair thing to do?
It's essential for AI practitioners to understand that responsible AI is not primarily an AI problem. It's as simple as that. And you pointed to the question of governance. Who should decide? It's not the AI practitioner. It's not me, for sure. So what does that mean in practice?
Yeah.
In practice, what it means is you build something like a fairness maturity framework. We're building one like this. you work with ethicists, with lawyers on building it. You try to capture the different interpretations of fairness that exist. And what this ends up being is not a tool that tells you what to do. It's a tool that gives you a big menu of questions that you should ask and consider.
Mm.
And then what you build is you build processes of consultation, where you sort of like put the options on the table, and then you have like a decision framework, right, where you sort of weigh, pros and cons and risks, and again, like, look, this has been used way before AI, right? Like these kinds of risk assessments, and the decision processes, consultation processes, and so on. And one example of this, I think, that is quite interesting is Facebook has built this external advisory board that is not fully rolled out yet. There's like 40 people, if I remember correctly, who represent all kinds of like countries and political views and other types of views, right? And their goal is going to be, in the context of content moderation, to kind of look at all these edge cases that are hard, right? And then come up with like recommendations. Obviously they're going to carry a very heavy burden of representing, lots of people, but they don't work for Facebook, right? Like they're an external body.
Uh-huh.
And I think that one of the, if you want ideas for what to do next, after weights and biases, I feel like, although I'm sure you're going to be busy with this for a while, is like, I think the question of governance in AI is and how to build infrastructure, and this is like people infrastructure, right? For transparency, for accountability, for risk assessments. You see the recent EU paper on AI scratches the surface by asking, some of the big questions that need to be answered for responsible AI. I think we're only getting started here, but the thing that I'm most excited about is that AI is going to replace humans in decision making across the range of decisions that people make in any domain, right? And I think most of the time it's going to be a huge improvement. But now all of a sudden we need to go through like thousands of years, of political science, right? On like how do societies govern themselves, and kind of bring that into AI, right? So that's a pretty freaking daunting task. But I think this is what we're talking about, and every investment that I see in this is orders of magnitude smaller than it needs to be.
So when we were last talking, we were talking about an actual kind of case study, which I thought was really interesting on voting in India and stopping the spread of misinformation, and how there isn't like kind of one definition of fairness, and you kind of give people a menu of options, which I think is a really interesting perspective. I guess I'm kind of wondering if you could say a little more about what might be on that menu of fairness, right? Like I think it's so interesting when different people have different ideas of what's fair, and actually, like you say, it's not your role to resolve it, but you must have opinions on what feels fair and not.
Yeah, of course. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the most important thing to realize, first of all, is that fairness is a bit of a social construct in a way. It depends a lot on context, and it depends a lot on how a particular society has decided to govern itself, right? So fairness ends up being political inevitably. So let's try to ground this with a very concrete example, right? So here's three possible interpretations of fairness that find, that resonate both with, moral philosophy interpretations, but also with legal interpretations, and finally with mathematical interpretations, because the computer science community is also building, metrics of algorithmic bias. All right. So here's the three, right? The first one could be minimum quality of service. This is also known as minimum threshold in philosophy. And the idea there is that you want an AI, for example, to work well enough for everybody. And well enough might mean, if you have a computer vision system that detects people, right, or detects faces to be able to put like masks on them or whatever, that it works well enough, across things like skin tones and skin reflectance and age and gender and other characteristics, right? Like that would be sort of like a great example. It doesn't matter if it works, a lot better for a group than another, as long as it works, above a certain, precision recall, for everybody. Mm-hmm. The second interpretation would be equality, right? So if we go back to the India misinformation example, one question there could be, if I have some measure of accuracy for my, I think we were talking about the civic classifier that basically identifies, among all of the posts about cats and dogs on Facebook, what are the ones that are actually discussing political issues, right? Like maybe, the political agenda of a particular politician or party, right? And again, like to recap, we want to find those because we have limited resources in terms of human reviewers that look at content and check if they violate our policies or the law. And so you want the AI to basically prioritize those cues, essentially, right? This is something, Lucas, that I know you understand very well because you've worked on sort of human computation a lot. So so back to equality. In India, obviously, languages and regions have a big social significance, right? Because they align with religion, they align with caste, and they align with other sort of important social dimensions. So imagine that your civic classifier, works well enough for everybody, for all languages and regions. But imagine that it's like under predicting a little bit, for some language and like over predicting a little bit for another language. So what would happen is that we would be allocating more human resources for the language where it over predicts and a bit too few for the one where it under predicts, right? So there, we actually want to have a higher standard in a way of fairness. We want to say, look, minimum quality of services is maybe not good enough. We want to make sure that we're offering equal, protection against misinformation to everybody as much as possible. And then the third interpretation of fairness, which is sort of widely accepted, would be to go from equality to equity. And so when we think about equity, we no longer think about equal treatment, right? We think about, is there any group that deserves special consideration, right? So we're living this in the US right now, obviously, with a big awareness and awakening around racial justice, right? Where obviously, we're paying special attention to the Black community in the US. And the reason we're doing that is because of historical structural disadvantages, right? So if you took this to India, there might be a legitimate question. Some people might ask, hey, actually, maybe historically there's been some groups, some regions, some languages in India that have suffered more from manipulation or injustice. So therefore, we actually are going to allocate extra resources to make sure that group is really protected because, given the same amount of disinformation or misinformation, the harm to that group will be bigger, relatively speaking, right? And so these are questions that, an AI engineer like me should be asking but not answering. It's really important to basically escalate those questions, to the local team, to policy experts, right? Find ways to involve, external people to give an opinion. So that's what I mean with the menu of options. Each of those translates in math and in code to a different choice. But that choice I should not make neither deliberately nor accidentally by just like picking something that looks reasonable mathematically if I don't understand what the implications are.
Do you find that it's easy to articulate those choices to a non-technical audience? I feel like you're framing it in a very technical way. Like, is it clear to people like what they're choosing?
Help me understand your question. So who would be the audience more concretely?
Well, I guess like I'm imagining, you're saying like, hey, do we want to kind of treat all regions equally in the India example or something else, right?
Right.
And then that something else might be like, we prefer to like over predict some regions.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to picture, I guess that part makes sense, but it seems like actually there's sort of like this other question of like, if we wanted to sort of do something that I think, is kind of like affirmative action, right? In college admissions, I'm picturing.
Sure.
So if you want to do that, actually, then you have to get someone to tell you like kind of exactly the tuning that they want, right? And I'm not sure I could even come up with like what's, exactly the fair amount of the fair distribution to apply. I'm not even sure how I would answer that, or I'm not even sure how I would like ask someone that question in a way that I would get a useful answer out of them. We certainly don't like walk around in our heads with like exactly a particular distribution that feels the most fair.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's exactly the reason why equity is the hardest of these three lenses on fairness, right? So I think in practice, you'll find that most teams, most product teams, most AI engineers will be either, asking questions of minimum quality of service, right? And if you want, we can talk about how to operationalize that. It's surprisingly easy, actually. Or questions of equality, of equal treatment, which is conceptually easy, but a bit harder to implement. When it comes to questions of equity, these are not really questions that are directly addressed to AI engineers. These are really questions that are the overarching leader of a product needs to be reasoning about equity. I'll give you a concrete example. Adam Mosseri, who leads the Instagram team, has started to make public posts that you can Google about Instagram and equity. And basically what he's starting to do, he's initiating a dialogue where he's saying, hey, we will put the interests of communities above the interests of Instagram. If we feel that a certain product, causes unintended harm to a community, or that it doesn't serve it as well as we intended, then we will actually stop and rethink it, right? What does that translate exactly? Like if if I'm running ads, right, and I feel like, ads isn't working, for everybody, does that mean like I shut it down? Do I have a percent? Do I say, I cut my losses at minus 10%? Or like if I'm actually, we don't need to stay within the Facebook Inc. Sphere. I have close friends at Spotify, and at Netflix. The same questions occur there as well. In like, hey, do we inject some diversity of content, right? Do we allow some producers, some musicians, some filmmakers that are maybe a little bit in the shade, to kind of pop up? And then what's the hit that we're taking in terms of like our engagement metrics, right? In terms of like how many songs people listen, per day, or how many movies or shows people watch, per day, and stuff like that. I don't think there's an exact science on that, at all, but it's a very real question that many people are sort of reasoning about. And the last thing I'll say is that one of the big challenges is a question of governance, and I think you were alluding to that. It's a question of who decides, right? And if you think about it, we have democratic processes, right? Like I live in Mountain View. The city of Mountain View decides where we put bicycle lanes, and of course they're going to slow down traffic, but they're going to create other benefits. They're going to decide on like urban density, on things that are all like trade-offs, right? There's obviously, in luxury resorts and stuff like that, like in Truckee, I know because we recently bought a house there, and there's like, the city council will demand that, that you reserve a certain part of land and building, for like sort of less expensive, dwellings, to sort of give access, right, to housing to everyone. And in those cases, it's a bit easier because there's a democratic process by which, that city council gets elected. There's like public consultations. I feel like if I think about like one of the challenges that we're facing as technology companies is this idea of like, how do we bring in, public deliberation and consultation mechanisms in the decisions we make? At Facebook, of course, we're launching this external oversight board for content moderation, which is almost ready to go. We have like all the members identified, and I think this is only the beginning. I think that we're going to see a lot more of this. This was a very long answer. You have to.
It's a great answer, and I gotta ask though. You talked about operationalizing, and I do think that I was kind of thinking as I was asking the last question about kind of getting the details right. I think a lot of the mistakes that you see around algorithmic fairness, they're so glaring that probably the more important thing for most of the people that are listening to this interview is, how do you operationalize the basic stuff? Like, how do you make sure your thing isn't egregiously unfair? Maybe like your first definition.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question, because obviously we should talk about equity as a society, but as engineers, there's a lot of stuff we can do to make sure that our crap is built right, And so obviously, I have friends at Twitter, obviously, and I know that, there was like a very recent news cycle on the AI that automatically crops images, and like the challenge there is that some people, externally actually tested the system and realized like, if I put if I put a picture of a white person and a black person, and they're a little bit apart, and I create some blank in between, and it's like a rectangular shaped picture, then obviously there'll be some cropping, right, to kind of like render or something. And then, disproportionately, it seemed to pick the picture of the white person, right? So how did that happen, right? How does something like that happen? Well, Twitter says they tested, for racial bias, which is great, before they launched this AI, as they should, and I commend them for that. But the devil, as you say, is in the details, right? Like, do I have the right, test sets? Did I cover, like skin tones, correctly? And there's a bunch of work, by people like Joy Bolamwini and Timnit Gebru and many other co-workers, which is brilliant, right? On having like reference papers that kind of propose methodologies for doing these things. What we're doing, and my advice in general to the community is to invest heavily in transparency. We have started to do this with like media manipulation and deepfakes, where we've built and created data sets. And, this is only the beginning. I think that for many of these biases, whether it's in computer vision algorithms, in speech recognition algorithms, in ranking algorithms, in whatever you want, having methodologies that you can publish and talk about, where applicable data sets, that you can share, I think is going to be the way to go.
I see. So investing in being transparent about how you're doing things, and is the benefit there that you can get external people to comment on what you're doing and kind of catch unexpected errors?
I think there's two benefits, right? One is accountability, right? Like transparency implies accountability in a way, right? If I declare to the world that I have methods and processes for testing my stuff, then it better be that I have them, and it better be that they don't suck, right? And then on the latter part, on whether they suck or not, I guess like it's just like open sourcing or publishing, right? It's the same philosophy, right? Like if I open source my code, then often I actually get quite a bit of constructive feedback, and sort of the community helps improve it. To be clear, I mean, I think as a community at large, I mean, there's been a couple of really good papers. Google and Microsoft have done excellent work in proposing things like data sheets for data sets and fact sheets for models and things like that sort of invite, for transparency. But I don't think that we're not at a stage where there's like standards, that are sort of like widely adopted. But my prediction is that's where the field is going.
And so, I mean, how would this work if I'm just channeling my audience, which is, a lot of startups and, companies like, not, Facebook or Twitter. Like, how would you go about being transparent if, you're like a smaller company? Like, what would you do?
Yeah, good question. Where possible, use public data sets, of which there exists, I'm thinking again about, if you look up the work of, Joy Bolamwini and Timnit Gebru and many other co-authors, there are like reference data sets that have been proposed for things like face detection and gender recognition and so on. That's just one example. There's a lot more out there. Make sure to use them as like reference data sets, and maybe like even like report how your algorithms perform on those. If you're building like a human-centric AI application, right? That would be one. If you're a startup that's using, Azure or Google Cloud, if you're using any of the big three, like cloud ML providers, all of them are actually offering, libraries to detect biases in the data and in the predictions of the model. Definitely use those, right? And report on what you found. And then the second thing, of course, is put pressure. Put pressure on these companies. If they're providing you some pre-learned embeddings, whether it's for computer vision or for NLP or whatever, ask for transparency. Ask about like are there any funky things going on, in these sort of like text embeddings? Because there's a bunch of papers out there, right, that show that if you train, word or sentence embeddings, off big existing corporate, like Wikipedia, whatever you want, inevitably you're going to see well-documented things, right? Like, gender-related, nouns tend to be, tend to sort of fall closer in embedded space to stereotypically, male jobs, and etc. The same for females, right? And that could have like nasty consequences sort of downstream. So at least you should be aware of those.
Well, I guess that's a good segue into something I wanted to make sure I talked with you about, which is diversity and inclusion in AI. And I kind of bring this topic up with a little bit of, I don't know, awareness of the fact that we're both middle-aged white guys talking to each other about diversity and inclusion, but you have thought a lot about it. So I'd love to hear what you think can be done, should be done, is being done.
Yeah, no, I'd like to share, first of all, I'd like to share a story. And I don't know if I'm repeating myself, if we talked about that last time, but when Yo-Yo Ma came to NeurIPS in 2018, and he came to a workshop where, the theme of the workshop was AI for social good. And one of the questions, that was asked to Yo-Yo Ma was, how do you build trustworthy AI, right? And it's interesting. He said the most important thing for him was to understand who was behind the AI. Who are the humans behind the AI? What are their intentions? What are their fears? What is their background, right? What perspective do they bring to the table, right? What are their values, right? At the end of the day, what's the values of the human building the AI? And this actually echoes a theme that's very common when talking about building AI responsibly. One of the main questions we tend to get is, well, how diverse and how inclusive is the team behind the AI? Diversity is a tricky concept, right? Like diversity really means heterogeneity, right? It means having a team that has people from different, both innate but also chosen characteristics, right? Obviously, I was born in Spain. I'm a white dude. That means certain things. But then I have my political, religious, and maybe sexual and other choices that I made myself, right? And that sort of defines who I am and kind of reflects what my both like values and circumstances are, right? So bringing that sort of diversity into teams is very important, because teams that have that sort of diversity tend to make better decisions, because they tend to look at the problem from multiple angles, and they tend to ask more and harder questions. Inclusion means meaningful representation, right? It's like if you're at a cocktail party, it's one thing for everybody to get a cocktail, right? So there's inclusion, we're giving cocktails to everybody. It's a different thing to really sit down and understand what do you like drinking, like and so making sure that your voice is heard, and that your experience actually, you're not just like a token, person sort of ticking a box, in sort of like the diversity list, but really like that you be included, right? And that means creating a space where everyone's voice is heard, where people, feel like they can bring their authentic self to work, right? And sort of really like express themselves and not be shut down, right? So, a couple of questions. Question number one is, well, how do you do that? Like, how do you build a team like that? And question number two, why do you do it? Do you build a team like that, because it's a necessary condition in order to build responsible AI? So I'm going to start with the second question because it's tricky. And this is something that we've debated a lot. So one risk in coupling together, the goal of responsible AI and the goal of diversity and inclusion, is that the burden of building responsible AI can inadvertently fall more heavily on the shoulders of underrepresented people. And this is something that we've seen, in many fora, not just at Facebook, right? Whenever I'm in a forum that's trying to tackle, issues of responsible AI, disproportionately, I find myself in the company of women or underrepresented minorities, right? And it's interesting because I guess like there's this kind of like a sense of duty, right, in making sure that the AI is built responsibly if you are, a member of an underrepresented group. So the danger a little bit with ascribing, the goal of diversity and inclusion, as like a means to achieving responsible AI, is that you might inadvertently put that burden on only on a subgroup. So it's very, very important to actually keep these two goals separate and to sort of say like, no, building responsible AI is a duty of everybody, period. Now, let's turn our attention to building diverse and inclusive teams, which will help, right, with responsible AI goals, right? But it also will just create teams that make better decisions overall. So let's just focus on that part. So how do you do this?
Sorry, I have one more question on that first point. So, I feel like few people would argue that diversity and inclusion is bad, but it does seem like it comes up particularly frequently in AI, even like within CS practices, right? Like I feel like you don't hear a lot about diversity and inclusion in say like databases, but yet we touch databases probably maybe more than we touch AI systems. Like, why do you think that it's such an important topic for AI in particular?
Yeah, no, thank you. Very, very good point. Yeah. I mean, I guess because AI is increasingly replacing humans in making consequential decisions, right? Algorithms are used in criminal justice to assist judges with assessing risk and deciding whether someone can go out on, on bail or whether they have to wait, for trial in jail, right? In the education system or in employment, right, to automatically like pre-select resumes and things like that, with huge promise, right, because humans are very biased actually at selecting resumes, right? In medicine, right, for automatic diagnosis, et cetera, and so the opportunity to reflect and amplify biases that exist in society, in these automated decisions, is real and is very high, right? And so the stakes are very high. They're higher. A database is not going to make an automatic decision. It's going to give you some data. An AI is actually going to make a prediction or is going to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay, so how do you do it?
So typically, any diversity and inclusion strategy tends to include two big buckets, right? Like one is hiring, right? Like how do I hire more diverse people, and the other one is retention and growth, right? Like if I have an employee base that exists already, how do I make sure that not only that I don't lose, the underrepresented people, but let's just make sure that everyone has the same opportunities to grow and develop in their career, right? So that's the first thing, is you got to have a strategy, that focuses on finding people, growing people, keeping people. But then how do you do this, right? Like you could be tempted, we're all engineers and we love numbers and metrics, right? And I could say, well, this is easy, let's just map every individual, to some demographics. Let's just, figure out whether they're underrepresented, people or not. Maybe we treat gender, and other dimensions, separately, so that we don't, address, because it's intersectionality issues and other things like that. So you want to make sure that, just assume that you have like the right metrics, right? And then you could say, okay, so for every team, I have a target number, that I want to hit and so on. That's very tempting. But it's also fraught with tons and tons of unintended consequences, right? Because what might happen is that people managers might end up making decisions that take into consideration, someone's group membership, and that could be problematic, right? For a number of reasons. Reason number one, you never want anybody to be in a position where they feel like if they got promoted because they were Black or because they were a female, right? And you don't want others on the team to point fingers at them and say, oh yeah, sure, you got promoted for that reason, right? Or you got hired for that reason, right? It's extremely important that either whether someone is hired or not, or whether they get promoted, is purely based on merit, right? So then what do? Well, what you do is that you ensure that everyone has, consistent, equal opportunities and the right amount of support, right, to succeed, right? You make sure that no one is left behind. When it comes to hiring, to be very specific, right? What you can do in hiring is you can use the so-called Rooney Rule. I don't know if you've heard of that rule. It comes from the NFL. So it was the goal of that rule was to increase the racial diversity of football coaches in the US, and there was a coach called I can't remember right now if it was a coach or a team owner. Anyway, someone in a position of power called Rooney, who basically came up with this idea, which was like to say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we have like a diverse slate of people that we consider whenever there's a job opening, right? Mm-hmm. So, because one of the dangers, actually, one of the biggest risks to diversity at the hiring side is that people tend to hire their friends, mm-hmm. right? And obviously your friends tend to be like you. And so, what the diverse slate approach or DSA, aims to do is to say, look, if you have a position open, you can't just go and do like an opportunistic hiring where you just go and like grab your friend or your pal that you went to college with or whatever. You actually have to write, an inclusive job description, which means mm-hmm. that you really focus on the things that are really relevant to the job, right? And nothing else. And then second, you just go out and you make sure that you have a slate of candidates that you consider that is diverse. Now, once you have that slate, you have the bar is the same for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And that worked. Like in the NFL, I mean, there's a bunch of papers written about this, but done right, it helps. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing you can do, right? Other things that you can do is make sure that you have outreach programs, to create like awareness about the types of opportunities that exist. Because again, right, like people tend to reach out or source, from sort of familiar circles. You gotta break that barrier. And then inside the organization on like growing and keeping people, this starts with very simple things, like, do you have any kind of training, inside the company? And again, like if you're a small startup, there's a lot of resources. If you Google, diversity and inclusion resources, there's a lot of like awesome, talks and resources out there to just raise awareness. There's these small things, there's this training that we have at Facebook called Be the Ally. And Be the Ally really is about just keeping an eye out for people who maybe in a meeting or at work tend to be like more silent or like aren't noticed, and like maybe, their voice isn't heard, right? Or even maybe you sort of like witness, like a microaggression or a macroaggression. I mean, if it's a macroaggression, then everybody notices it in theory, right? But like keeping an eye for these things and then checking in with people, right? Like taking it on yourself to sort of go and like say, hey, I noticed this thing. It didn't feel like it was okay to me. How did you feel? And these small things, they make a huge difference in creating, an inclusive culture. On career growth, right? Like every manager should have a personalized career growth plan for everyone on their team. And, everyone is different, right? Has different interests, has different strengths, has different areas that they want to develop. Making sure that you consistently, personalize your career growth plan for each of your employees actually makes a very big difference as well. Because sometimes if you templatize it, and your requirements are like, the same, they might not be, adequate for certain people. Mm-hmm. That and a lot more, but that kind of like gives you a couple of ideas.
I'm curious if you have any suggestions for this. So these recordings that we do, we know we can look at the gender distribution of the people watching, and it actually skews over 90% male. Right. And it's funny because our user base is actually not that lopsided. So it feels like maybe there's something we're doing that's not connecting, at least with women that might be watching it. I guess how would you approach that?
Well, my initial reaction was, please ask the women who are not watching. But
yeah, fair enough.
But a couple of thoughts that come to mind. I mean, that one actually is extremely important, right? Like doing some user research and understanding, like why is this not resonating? Why is this not useful to you? A couple of other thoughts, obviously, one of them is like on the topics that are covered, right? Which is actually tied to what I just said, right? To sort of understand whether those are not useful. And then the other one, which I don't know if you already do, is to make sure to have at least as many female speakers as you have male speakers. And again, that's an interesting thing, right? Because you might say, well, maybe the potential audience is actually a majority male and a minority female. But that is an interesting point of intervention, right? Where you could sort of say, well, that's fine, but we're still going to aim for 50-50.
Makes sense. We always end with two questions, and I'd love to do that with you too, and kind of get your thoughts. These are a little bit open-ended, and I haven't prepped you for them, but I'm curious what you say. So, so one question we always end with is, what's an underrated aspect of machine learning that you think people should pay more attention to? And maybe for you, I'd tailor it to sort of like in ethics and responsible AI. What's something that you feel like maybe doesn't get the attention it deserves? It might be the whole topic doesn't, but like within that, is there something you'd especially like to call out?
Yeah, just be aware of averages. I hate averages and aggregated metrics. It's as simple as that, right? Like if you want to develop AI more responsibly, try to disaggregate your metrics. You just talked about gender, right? If you have access to gender, or if you have ways in which you can, have like the right sort of explicit informed consent for your users, to give their gender and be transparent about what you're going to use it for. If you have location, because obviously, even if you only take the US, right? Like the South is very different from the coast, very different from the center, and so on, right? Like disaggregate your metrics. And the test that I like to give is this, right? It's like, presumably, if you're launching a new refresh of your AI, whatever it might be, or a new model or whatever, presumably you have a launch criteria, right? Like you have criteria to launch or not launch. And most of the time, what I observe is that it's just an all-up metric that aggregates over all users, right? Well, don't do that. Instead, kind of disaggregate and look, across maybe gender, age, and location, just simple things. And then ask yourself, if you find a bucket that is significant, where your AI performs the worst, would you still launch? And like show care, right? That would be like a very sort of practical, thing to do.
I would say my reaction is that's a great suggestion for just competently launching AI also. So there's no trade-off here. I think definitely looking at distributions and things versus averages is a really good idea. Somehow I feel like you get less sort of like Gaussian distributions in AI than you do outside of it. So
yeah,
we're just gonna be asleep.
Yet people, I still see like all up averages everywhere I look, so I feel like we don't have like a discipline of doing it.
Okay, and our last question, maybe this actually goes back to like all the work that you've done in your career. But when you look at the kind of productization of machine learning, like taking an ML model from sort of conception to like actually in production doing something useful, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks, or where do you see the unexpected problems that someone outside the space might not realize comes up in that process?
Yeah, a lot of things come to mind, but I think the biggest one that comes to mind is that your training data is almost never representative of your live data, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's just life, and therefore, obviously people working on self-driving cars know this very well. That you might sort of train all of your, perception, behavior prediction and planning and whatever, like some data. And then, yes, you're going to have a situation on the road that you had never anticipated. So there's that. And that's like that would be like sort of like the problem of like the black swans, or like the sort of unlikely events and so on. But even outside of that, again, right, then you have like the very gross, mistakes that are sort of super easy to fix. Like, again, like if your application of AI is human centric, did you really have in your training data, people of all ages, genders, and skin tones, or not, right? And in a surprising amount of cases, you didn't. And then you deploy your thing, and now, there comes an elderly black lady, and the thing is just not working for her, right? Or in ASR, right? Like there's many different accents of English. Did you have like proper representation in your data or not? And most of the time, you didn't.
Hard to do, yeah.
It is hard to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's really great to talk, and thanks for taking an extra time to do two-parter here.
Really no, my pleasure, and I can't wait to feel embarrassed by watching the recording.
Awesome. When we first started making these videos, we didn't know if anyone would be interested or want to see them, but we made them for fun, and We started off by making videos that would teach people, and now we get these great interviews with real industry practitioners. And I love making this available to the whole world so everyone can watch these things for free. The more feedback you give us, the better stuff we can produce. So please subscribe, leave a comment, engage with us. We really appreciate it.